What's up, Chargers fans? We are a day removed from a big win. The Los Angeles Chargers, of course, go on the road to beat the Washington football team. Now, yesterday on our live stream, we talked about some of the early stats, some of the stats that Arjun was able to get to us because he's our pro football focus contact. But now we have some more stats, and we also have some comparison to other guys around the league because now all the stats are public. So we're able to compare how these Chargers did against each other, against other teams, against other players and whatnot. So I want to discuss that. And then we're also going to get into some snap counts, talk about some of the storylines from there. So Arjun, of course, is going to get into the main analytics and really dive into this. I just want to talk about some of the storylines and some of the trends from that game. Just purely, raw hard data here, not exactly the analytics deep dive that Arjun's going to do, but just some numbers that I thought we're talking about. So let's start with some of the additions from the offseason. And we got to start with the story of the day, really, the big story of the day, where that the offensive line absolutely held up against arguably the best defensive front in the league. So much so that of the 9 starters from yesterday, there were 9 starters yesterday. Granted, we don't have the Monday Night Football stats yet. 9 starters yesterday on different teams had a pass blocking efficiency grade of 100. The Chargers had 3 players of that 9 with a perfect pass blocking efficiency grade. That's obviously Ode Abuji here, Corey Linsley, and Rashawn Slater. And if I'm not mistaken, Matt Filer, even though he didn't have a perfect grade and it wasn't really a great day for him, I believe he was still 28th out of all offensive line starters from yesterday. So if you think about the 30 teams that have played, and there are 5 linemen, 5 starters, supposedly, depending on how guys rotate in and out. But of the starters, he was still 28th. So a really good performance overall. Did not expect Abuji, Linsley, and Slater all to basically be perfect. They are 100% pass blocking efficiency. They were perfect in pass protection, which is amazing. Big deal for Linsley because that's kind of what he was advertised to be, right? Like the best lineman on the team, and he was one of them. Rashawn Slater had arguably the toughest job. Perfect. Ode Abuji had the most, I don't know about pressure, but fans were certainly down on him recently, and he went out and performed perfectly in pass protection. So that's amazing. All 3 additions, 100% pass blocking efficiency. 3 of the 9 best offensive linemen from yesterday were Chargers players. Couldn't tell you when the last time that happened was. And then another addition I want to talk about is Asante Samuel Jr., who led the corners, and I should say the Chargers corners yesterday in yards allowed. So they were tied with Chris Harris Jr. with 15. Reception percentage, that was only 2 receptions on 4 targets. Yards after the catch, I believe he only allowed 2 or 3 yards after the catch. And then, of course, passer rating when targeted was just 59.4. Then I think, matter about most importantly, but yesterday, leading the team with 3 tackles and 2 run stops was a big deal, right? You saw him flying up as advertised, the kind of heady, head in the game, balls to the wall sort of corner that he is when it comes to tackling. And he showed out. He led the corners with 3 tackles and 2 run stops. One of them was very key because it forced Gibson inside, and White was able to make that forced fumble. So really big showing from some of the additions from the offseason. The other ones, I'll talk about some of the pass rushers of the game. So the impressive one was Joey Bosa, who led the team. Now, well, yes, he did lead the team, obviously, but among players with at least 20 pass rush snaps, Joey Bosa was number 1 in pass rush win rate with 35%, which basically means every 3 plays he's winning his rep, which is insane. Because you look at Myles Garrett and he's at 31. Now, he wasn't as productive, and I don't know which one you prefer to weigh more. I like to look at both of them. Obviously, he was not as productive. He didn't get his sacks or maybe not as many pressures. Sometimes this is based on how the play was, right? If he wins immediately, but they throw a screen or something like that, you're not going to be productive. But in the win rate, he was better than anybody with at least 20 pass rush reps. And so that's pretty good, right? Joey Bosa is definitely one of the best edge rushers in the league. And right now he is number 1 in win percentage, like he should be, because he's a great player. On the flip side of that was unfortunately Jerry Tillery. So of the 49 interior defensive linemen or edge players who had 28 or more pass rush snaps, and I picked 28 because that's how many Jerry Tillery had. So anyone with as many snaps as Jerry Tillery or more, of those guys, Jerry Tillery is tied for last in pass rush productivity with 0 and tied for last in pass rush win rate with 0, which basically means that he didn't win a single rep. in at least as a pass rusher, and he didn't do anything to against this interior. That was fine. I think they were solid. Obviously, Scherf is the big name there, but Tillery really needed to step up. He didn't win a single snap. That's not good. Now, Kyler Fackrell, for example, his pass rush productivity is also 0, but his win rate is, I think, 10%, which means 10% of his snaps. And I think he had 27. So 10% of his snaps, he won. So even though it's not a great stat line, he at least was winning some reps. He just wasn't able to capitalize and get some production out of it. Tillery didn't put up any production, and he didn't win a single rep based on this metric. That's not good. And that's a big concern considering how much Staley was hyping him up. And then, of course, being able to sit out in the preseason and not do anything because he's had a phenomenal camp. So he's good to go. And then his first game in the league or this season, nothing, goose egg. And also no tackles, no run stuffs, no passes defended. He was blanked in every single category, and he lost every single pass rush rep. That's not good. It could have, like I said, it couldn't have gotten any worse. There's no negative grade here, but he was on his way to earning one. So not good for sure. Unfortunately, just a really, really poor showing. I don't think this will be the case every game, but with expectations very high for a first round pick, this is very, very disappointing. Okay, so another one. If you've been following the podcast and following or what I've been saying at training camp or what we've been talking about, I've been saying that Jalen Guyton is the wide receiver 3. And he was very early on in training camp. He was getting, even though Tyron Johnson was more productive, right? You saw all those deep passes. Jalen Guyton was still, again, even with Tyron Johnson being better than him at training camp, Jalen Guyton kept trotting out as the wide receiver 3. And I figured it would take some time for Palmer to kind of work into it. But then at some point, especially after that first preseason game, and if how good Palmer looked at training camp, everyone's going, oh, Palmer's wide receiver 3. Oh, Palmer's wide receiver 3. Here we go. He's kind of taking that spot. Here we go. And I've been trying to tell you guys. And so if you've been following, this shouldn't surprise you. Jalen Guyton, are you ready to watch him trot out as wide receiver 3? And he did. He trotted out as wide receiver 3. He had 53 snaps yesterday, just 8 fewer than Mike Williams. He played 65% of the team's snaps. So obviously Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are your starters, but Jalen Guyton is definitely that wide receiver 3, at least right now. And of course, you see Josh Palmer lower on that list with only 14 snaps to Jalen Guyton's 53. Now, can Palmer eventually work his way into becoming that wide receiver 3? Absolutely. I really think right now Guyton is the 3A to Palmer's 3B. But right now, it almost seems like Guyton has that wide receiver 3 job completely taken, and Palmer is kind of that wide receiver 4. But Arjun just texted me and Steven and I that Palmer had a freaking ridiculous rep against Fuller that put him in a blender. So if the all 22 comes out, I can't wait to watch it. But for now, Jalen Guyton is the wide receiver 3. He had some really good plays yesterday. He had that great, shoulder fade catch or whatever it was. He had that one catch where he took it, I think it was like a 3rd or 2nd and 20 or whatever it was, and he turned it into a 3rd and 3, right? Because he got like 17 yards, breaking multiple tackles. Pretty solid game from him overall. So right now, I don't see any reason to take away from Guyton snaps and give more to Palmer. I'd like to see Palmer get more involved. That just might come at the expense of, say, another tight end or something like that. Okay, another surprise. Even though Arjun and I, especially that first day of training camp, talked about, well, it's kind of interesting that Kaiser White was out there more than Drew Tranquill. Maybe they're just working Drew Tranquill back. Even though we've been talking about that for a while, I really didn't expect Kaiser White to be like easily by far the linebacker 2 next to Kenneth Murray, because I believe they're listed on the depth chart. And I think Staley has referenced Tranquill and White as co-starters. That was not even close to the case. And, I was talking about this, I was looking at some of my tweets, and I was talking about this as early as last year. What do you do because Kaiser White, when Drew Tranquill went down, looked really good in some games. Now, it wasn't perfect, but then, you kind of wonder, what can they do with Kaiser White moving forward? Because he's really looking good. And so, of course, you want to keep all 3 guys, but what do you do with Tranquill? Does he become the backup? Does he keep his starting job when he comes back from injury? Or does Kaiser White develop into, the co-starter with Kenneth Murray? And it turns out, yep, Kaiser White is that guy. And so I saw it pretty early on in camp. I'm there on my tweet about the best bolts and the bust bolts of week 1. I said that Kaiser White was one of the best, right? He was one of the best bolts through week one. And for bust, it was Drew Tranquil, not because he didn't play well, but it's because White looked like the starter. But again, I thought that Drew Tranquil was going to work his way in, returning from his injury, whatever, nice and slow, no problem. It hasn't even been the case. Drew Tranquil got 3 snaps on defense yesterday, which is honestly a surprise. Now, the Chargers held the ball for about 2/3 of that game, and they really didn't do anything all that exotic. They didn't face a ton of offensive plays as is. So potentially moving forward, Tranquil will get more snaps. But again, that 5% share that he had maybe won't change. Now, we saw him on special teams quite a bit. Unfortunately, the special team didn't look all that great in terms of coverage. And Drew Tranquil let a couple of guys run by him during that game, which was a surprise for me for sure. So we'll see what Tranquil's role is moving forward. Knock on wood, Kaiser White doesn't get hurt, but obviously if Kaiser White gets hurt, then Tranquil immediately flips and jumps and takes the lion's share of those snaps. But kind of a surprise to see him only play 3 so far. Another one that was a bit of a surprise was how little they targeted Donald Parham in general. They only targeted him once. And I believe of the 41 snaps that he had, only 14 were as a receiver, right? He ran routes on only 14 of them, whereas the other 27 he was blocking, which is fine. Like, he is the tight end too. Jared Cook is that primary receiving tight end. I just thought that when you struggle in the red zone, and I believe they only scored 2 touchdowns on 6 attempts, which I don't know if that's bad. I don't know if that's good, but you want to have more, obviously. And in those moments, like you see against the Bucks here, right in the top left, or in the bottom left against the Jaguars, you want to use a guy like Donald Parham to create mismatches. And they didn't really do that, which was a surprise. So if you had told me that Steven Anderson would have more targets than Parham, I'd say, okay, fine, I guess. But for Donald Parham to only have 1 target and that's it, and I don't believe it was a red zone target, that was surprising because the Chargers were struggling in the red zone. Part of that was a bogus, incomplete fumble pass, whatever you want to call that. But they were struggling and they could have used someone like Donald Parham and they really didn't. So that was kind of odd. And I believe this is the last thing I have for you guys is the running back 2 share. Now, based on how everything looked in training camp and in the preseason, Justin Jackson was pretty much the running back 2. Then with him going down and being hurt, okay, potentially there can be a Joshua Kelly steps up, Larry Rountree steps up, but then Jackson comes back. And then in the preseason and at training camp and at the scrimmage, you see Jackson taking all those RB2 snaps. Eckler is obviously the running back 1, but Justin Jackson was pretty clearly the RB2 until the game, until yesterday, when it turns out you have, where is it? So Eckler played 47 snaps, which I don't know how much that's going to change because of his health. If he's more healthy this week, he'll probably play more, and they should. But then Larry Rountree plays 22 snaps and Justin Jackson only 11. And it really felt like more than that, to be completely honest, especially because Larry Rountree is the guy who actually gets the touches, right? Even though Jackson played about exactly half as many snaps, Justin Jackson only had 1 carry and he had 1 reception. Whereas you have Larry Rountree with, I believe, no receptions, but he had 8 carries that game. It really looked like he was the running feature behind Austin Eckler. And it looks like they're just moving away from Justin Jackson. Now, maybe that's game plan specific. They inactivated Kelly. So Rountree is at worst the RB3. Jackson is at worst the RB3 right now. But it was really interesting to see Jackson be completely leapfrogged by Larry Rountree. But at the end of the day, as a pure runner, at this point, you're probably taking Larry Rountree over Justin Jackson. And even though you like Justin Jackson a lot, even if you think he's a better runner, and maybe he is, you don't want him to go in for 3 snaps and have to pull him and then put Rountree in. You'd rather just build your game plan around the players you know that are going to be there, unless they're irreplaceable, like Austin Eckler. So even though he can potentially get hurt, and he has, you want to have someone there that is very consistent, like your Larry Rountree. And he is more consistent. Right now, he is fresh legs, right? He's going to be in he has the longer contract right now. He is the guy that this coaching staff drafted. So currently he's the RB2. A bit of a surprise, but then not really, considering he was the best running back of the preseason. I'm a little surprised only because the snaps indicated that Jackson was the RB2, but the performance suggests that Rountree is the RB2. And then yesterday, of course, we see that Rountree has basically taken that job. So again, maybe it's game specific. I don't know. But for right now, Larry Rountree, 22 snaps, Justin Jackson, 11. Wasn't a run heavy day as is. Maybe if the team starts falling behind Maybe they'll lean on Justin Jackson a little bit more. Maybe next week against the Cowboys, they need Justin Jackson because they want to pass the ball a little bit more, because Larry Rountree just isn't quite there yet as a receiving back. And I don't mean, again, receiving back, I don't mean screens, dump offs, some flat routes, whatever. I mean, like as a weapon in the receiving game, like Austin Eckler. Rountree's not there yet. Jackson is a little bit ahead. And Eckler, of course, is way ahead as one of the best receiving backs in the league. But I think, I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think next week that Larry Rountree plays more snaps? Do you think it's Justin Jackson? Do you think it's game dependent? Do you think it's score dependent? I don't know. But it was a surprise to me for sure. So let me know what you guys think. All right. That is it from me. I don't know if you guys thought of any other stat. There are plenty of other stats to go over, but those are some of the more notable ones, some of the more notable storylines that I thought were interesting, whether that be, again, Guyton is wide receiver 3, how Tillery was not that great, how great the offensive line was, whatever was your favorite stat, or if you have a favorite stat that I didn't mention, let me know in the comments. And as always, bolt up.